Welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, Lori Boyer from Unboxing Logistics, and today is going to be a little bit different when it comes to the Unboxing Logistics podcast. A few weeks ago, I enjoyed myself in Orlando, Florida at RILA, the Retail Industry Leader Association event, and I was able to have a really great chat on stage with John Naylor from Trew and Scott Davis of JD Finish Line. They had recently completed, in conjunction with our Summit Advisory team, completed a project where they had taken a legacy fulfillment center, fully manual processes, and turned it into a fully automated, modernized facility, all while everything was still happening in the facility. They were still sending off shipments, receiving goods, all that. So it was really interesting to hear their insights on how they did that, the tips that they have for you if you're looking on modernizing on any of your facilities. So you're not going to want to miss it. Sit back, enjoy, and we'll see you later. This is I think the session was called Beyond the Hype, and that's because there's a lot of hype and talking about different things, but I have brought two of the best real people. These are real boots on the ground, people who are going to help you understand how to take a warehouse or multiple DCs and modernize them while keeping everything going. And that is a freaking hard thing to do, as I know you guys know. So I was introduced to these gentlemen through some of my cohort. I am Lori Boyer, you heard, from Unboxing. I host the podcast Unboxing Logistics. I work at Easy Post. And one of our teams is the Summit Advisory team. And they worked with these gentlemen on this project for multiple years to get these warehouses up and going. Love working with our Summit Advisory team. And so I want to dive in. I want each of these guys to introduce themselves first and tell you why the heck you should even care who they are, what their role was in the project, and what they kind of did for us. So we're going to start with Scott, and then we'll hear from John.
Thanks, Lori. So my role in the program was really to establish what our design criteria was before we even got started. All right, what are we trying to accomplish? And then what partnerships do we need to bring to the table to be able to complete that?
Okay, awesome, easy peasy. John.
Good morning. I'm John Naylor. My role in the program was actually the early boots on the ground, working hand in glove with Scott and his team, the Summit team, really on data collection, information gathering, working with the operational teams, mapping out all the process flows, and working with the leadership team with Scott and Jimmy, understanding what the business goals would be for the next 5 years of the program.
Okay, perfect. So let's talk about the project itself for a second. For someone who wasn't boots on the ground, wasn't living it, how do you describe the project? What is it that you actually did? Scott, you want to start?
Sure. So this distribution center is in California. So the overall goal was to help maintain the staff that we had while doing more productivity. And how could we introduce automation into that program so that we could have a seamless transition from the way we did the old way and the new way. And through that process was our guiding principle, which was not to disrupt the business.
Okay.
How can we do that simultaneously? And it's really easy. So, you guys, there's not a lot of stories here.
Oh, wow.
But really through the process, you really learn that the people that you're working with, that's what's important. So.
The people that you're working with, that's important. That's perfect. I love that. Can you tell us a little bit about the size of the facility? How many people are working there? Either one of you, John.
Sure.
You haven't.
I think Scott really oversimplified it, or I could simplify it more of.
Yeah.
It was open heart surgery as you're walking down the street is really what we accomplished.
Open heart surgery as you're going down the street.
Yeah.
Okay, really easy.
From a size of a facility, I think it's really not the size that I think in this case is the speaking point. It was the complexity of the solution itself. This is a highly automated facility. It involves multiple aisles of mini load technology, ASRS shuttles, put-to-light sortation, but also, and most critical, it had a team in place when we showed up before we ever automated anything, and it was working with them to understand how do we keep product going out the door. At the end of the day, it mattered. Product had to get to the client, had to get to the store. Ultimately, that's what mattered each day.
Okay, so I'm curious, you mentioned the team was already there. Do you feel like that was a positive that you had a team already in place, or do you feel like that was more challenging?
No, absolutely. The team there, manual environment, so pallet jacks, single picking racks with carts, but the excitement that they had to move into automation was just fantastic.
Oh, okay.
So the buy-in that we had to get from them, and that team out there is just fantastic. When you go through this transition, you never know what you're going to get out of certain leadership and out of certain people and how they're going to acclimate to the new processes. And so with Jimmy's leadership and our operations team, and really the core group that they had, they have a tenured group. They really love the business that we're in. And so it made it really easy to get their buy-in from that perspective. And it became more about including them more often instead of you go over here and keep doing your thing while we're doing this real bright, shiny thing for everybody.
That was one of the things that struck me in our first visit, if you remember, went to Morgan Hill. I've automated a lot of DCs in the course of my career, and when the operational staff knows that change is coming, it creates a lot of anxiety. And I think the team had done a really good job at JD of introducing that change as a positive for the building. There was already a sense of pride in the building, and it was evident, talking to the leads. I call it servant leadership that you see at JD. We like to do the same at ours. Of the first response from anybody on the floor is, what can I do to help? Tell me a little bit about this process. And when I started the initial findings of, tell me about what you do. Can you walk me through the steps, the process of how you receive this? How do you check this in? Mapping out everything. There was enthusiasm. There was pride of, well, how am I going to change this going forward? What does this look like? They were really empowered to be a partner through the process, all the way down to the people that were packing and receiving boxes, up to the CEO level of the company. It was a really refreshing environment.
Okay, so I'd love to talk about buy-in then, because that's like fantastic. They were all bought in, they were enthusiastic, but I think we've all been there when people aren't bought in. So I guess my first question is, what is it that they did to get such good buy-in early on? You mentioned the team. Was that from your angle? What were your methods?
The first thing is honesty. So these things are complex. And so you have to bring some excitement when you're discussing it. It cannot just be, watch these slides with me, this automation is going to be great. You really have to get their buy-in in that regard. So you teach them early and often, and then engage them frequently.
Yeah, we really didn't work in a vacuum through the design process. So right down, Jimmy, your staff bringing in the site leads, the supervisors, get their opinion. They're the ones that have to live with this for the next 20, 25 years. Are we improving their life each day?
And not on an island, too. So this distribution center is in Morgan Hill, California. We're in Indianapolis, Indiana. So this team of people are going to come, kind of into my house, and they're going to do this thing. What is that really? And so we immediately had to make relationships with those leaders, and that ended up, really working out for us.
So you mentioned honesty. I think that's a really good one, being clear. But also what I picked up from both of you were the fact that you were open to feedback from people. I think sometimes when we go too top down, we're pushing our ideas on people, and that always ends up not really getting legitimate buy-in. So we mentioned buy-in of the actual operators, workers on the ground. What about higher level in terms of, I'm guessing this didn't cost $3, it's a spendy thing. So how do you get buy-in to automate a facility that is going to cost money?
Sure. Just ask. They normally say yes right away.
Just ask.
There's not a lot, push right now. So really, it is a process, right? You have to have the data. You have to have the correct data. You have to get the correct buy-in from the right leaderships across all the different companies in our example. So, JD Sports acquired Finish Sign in 2018 and Shoe Palace just thereafter. And with that, they were moving out of one building into another building. And so it was a clean slate for us, a brand new building. And they were going to operate manual, and we were going to bring this automation in. And during that time, we had a shift in our CEO. So we had to sell this project to a CEO twice. Yeah. Again, so easy. Second time was even easier. But so we had to go through really over and over again, just selling that. We know the ROI is going to be there for us. We know the impact to the people, that the boots on the ground in the distribution center was going to work. And so I would say tirelessly working back and forth with the new leadership engaging with our leaders at each fascia to let them know that the project was going to be a success. They just needed to give us the money.
So transparency, and I also am hearing from you kind of a trigger point, right? Like most of the time when you're going to do a big something, it may be because there was an acquisition, or it may be because there is a new CEO. That could even be a trigger point in itself that kind of brings up these ideas. I've got a couple of questions that have come in already. One of them was, though, about headcount. So it says, assuming the automation decreased associate headcount, how did you manage that with employees as you went?
You want me to take a stab at that to start? Because I thought you guys did a great job.
Yeah.
So the first question, I'll take a step back because it was part of the buy-in. When we look at these types of projects collectively, all of us in this room, automation is to serve two functions. One, it's either to add capacity to an operation that you just manually can't get there, or it's to reduce your cost by eliminating labor. At the end of the day, the focus was on the right process, the right business flows. Once you have those ironed out, and that's where we collectively spent our first year, was making sure we had the big beautiful room day. You remember that? A big beautiful mind with all the strings attached. We actually had one of those for this process. But part of that, you get the ROI model, and one of those was around labor, specifically in the forklifts in the back for reserve storage. We had a big day of discussing, do we automate this with ASRS? Do we go with forklifts? It was going to be about 65 people, I think, if we went manual. The critical thing for us was mapping out the growth of the company. Where are we going to be in 3 months, 6 months, 6 years? And the finish line team did such a great job of hiring appropriately, so we didn't overstaff to lay off people later when that job function was eliminated. So there's a real conscious effort to allow the staff to grow and stay just behind the curve of where we needed people as we phased in the implementation. So it was a very, what I'm going to call people-focused type approach. I thought they did a great job of putting the people first.
Yeah, it's the do more with the same people, not reduce the people, right? Because we knew with the automation, what that did is that enabled us to bring different products from different fascias into that building, which increased our volume. And again, the selling point back to how do we get the project approved, looked at the store growth and looked at the volume growth and where we needed that to be so we could increase our speed to our customer, both our stores and our digital customer, while maintaining quality and reduce costs. So the people, we can't say enough about that over and over and over again, but they had the buy-in because just that, it was the hiring practices that Jimmy and his team started with.
Yes.
And it was the transparency every time. Because let's not fool ourselves. That was absolutely a question that people had. You're going to eliminate roles. Is this your goal? No, that's not our goal. We need to do more. We're going to do it with the same. And we're going to tailor our hiring practices to do just that.
Okay. I really love how you mentioned looking to the future. I think that's so critical when you're doing any of these big projects, that you're not looking for just today, but you're looking to the future. We have a couple of additional questions that I think kind of tie in here. Somebody asked you to talk, and I think, John, this may be you, but I'm sure Scott as well. Can you talk about the selection process of how you decide which technology? And you mentioned some of that a little bit. How did you decide what was going to work best for this operation?
Okay, great question. So again, as you step back and you map out what you think is your perfect process, you've interviewed everybody on the floor that has done that. You understand what steps they go through. It really becomes a fairly simple black and white math exercise. It's an ROI. Do we invest the money? What is the payback on that? We're automating a process that we've defined as efficient and productive. The only other piece that comes into that is, or two pieces that we kind of weighed, is it future-proof? Am I painting myself into a corner? Because I know nobody else's operation in this room changes over time, well, only yours. So are we future-proof? Have we painted ourselves into a corner? Or if our business needs change or flex, like ours did, acquisitions happen, will this be able to accommodate that change? The last piece comes down to just risk. What is the risk profile of the client? There are some people, while you might have a fantastic ROI, it's just not in their DNA to take that high-risk step on technology. So I felt like we landed on a good balance of really good IRR and ROI in the building, but also a good element of risk for future-proofing the operation.
Were there any debates that
were
had?
Never. So we, didn't coin the term, but we value engineered some things so that we could, reduce the cost while looking at what the forecasts were, knowing that things change. And then you take that and say, how can I expand on the automation at the current footprint within the current building without having to go, say, add another building. So when we did that, we immediately said, okay, we can design this way, and we have room for expansion and growth. And so that was a real partnership. And John mentioned it. We basically created a flow we called it the beautiful mind, which was essentially every case that came in had a destination, and it went to some area, and then it shipped out some way. And that really helped us define what we needed and what we would say the go-live year would be for the target, and then where we thought we would be in 3 and 5 years based off of your merchant forecasting and your other business plan forecasting that you have, such as store growth.
Okay, I would love to hear where maybe you were surprised when it came to things, whether it's technology, whether it's, I know you had slab issues and power challenges and all the kinds of things you can imagine going on that are surprises. Maybe share some of those with us, the challenges you ran into, things that caught you off guard, how that went.
Well, I knew it was going to be perfect the first day I walked in, and it was a 7-sided building. I challenge anybody in this room, would you design a 7-sided building? It's the first one I've seen in my career of 30 years.
Did we mention it was in California? So
yes. Interesting yards to work with. We moved shipping and receiving a few times, but there were some challenges that did pop up with slab electrical that came up. Just some things that none of us would have known because it was on the prints. It was supposed to be that way, and it just turned out not to be that way.
And so how did you respond? Or what are your suggestions to respond nimbly? Because I'm sure you responded perfectly.
So it starts with your business case in the beginning. You need to define what you need, what extra do you need to have just in case, right? What contingency dollars do we need to have? They need to be defined somewhat.
Okay, write that down. Have some backup dollars. Got to have some contingency dollars. They're going to come.
Yeah, you have to have that. And then, being in California, we knew that the rules were going to be more strict in other areas. And so when we met and we made the business plan, we had to say, listen, we would normally not request some of this, but we know this can happen. And so contingencies are huge. And do you want to go back in a year and ask for more, or would you rather fight the battle up front so that you can stay within your budgets? How can we do this? And we're going to be good stewards of the dollar, so we're not going to spend it if we don't need it. And unfortunately, and fortunately, in this instance, we did have to rip up some of the slab, and we had to go back and add some additional electricity.
Why do you say unfortunately?
So I say unfortunately?
You said unfortunately and fortunately.
Because we had to do it.
Unfortunately, we had to do it.
I didn't want to have to do it.
But fortunately, because now it's good.
Fortunately, we did have the contingency in place. But the unfortunate thing is really that, you want to make the best plan and have the best information and execute as fast as you can with as much quality, all those things that you want to do. And so when that happens, that's not just about the money, it's about the time, right? We had things that we were practicing already on what our schedules would be. How would we move the manual environment around to get this automation being built? How do you unload all the steel? All these details. So I say that, but I really enjoy this stuff. So for me, it was just something else to have some opportunity to work on, right? This is another challenge we can get into. So.
I'm an optimist. So when I see things like that, I'll tell you what the positive was for me. It pressure tested the team. So when all of a sudden we had to rip up an area of the floor that they were already manually picking orders from, it actually forced us to say, okay, all these contingency plans that we meticulously went through for a year, it forced us to put that into play long before we ever thought we'd need to. And it really forced the operation to get efficient in some areas. Are we taking up more space than we need? What do we do if the next phase of this, I've got to move over here? And it actually pushed the operation and the installation teams to work a little closer together and pressure test that. What do we do next weekend if we have to pivot? And I think that allowed us to, quite frankly, hit some curveballs out of the park every time they were thrown at us for the next year.
Can I ask, that's brought up a question for me. You mentioned timeline a little bit. You talked about a year of working on contingency plans. Can you give me a timeline of kind of how it worked from when you first decided, okay, it's time to make an investment here, So did you spend a year planning and then start implementing? You know, what was the timeline look like if somebody's thinking
Sure.
of doing it themselves?
I'll take the front part. As I mentioned earlier, we had a shift in CEO, so that actually extended the timeline about a year longer than we wanted. I
Okay.
call it a year because we deal with peaks and
You get contingency time too,
yeah,
right?
well, you have to deal with back to school for us, and then also Christmas holiday. So you're looking at 6 months that are the times you could actually potentially raise something up without
Okay.
risking the business. And so that was the first hurdle we had to get over. Is you looked at the forecast, you knew we needed the capacity. Okay, let's pause for a little bit, and rightfully so. You know, the new CEO came in, he needed to get his bearings, we owed him that, and we worked through it. And after that, you really had, for us at JD Sports, we have to take when's the optimal time to go live, and then work backwards. Because again, you can't go live on November the 15th, right? Because it's right during your holiday peak. So
You can go live on November 15th.
do it yes, ma'am.
You
Last
can
day.
do whatever you want,
Yes,
but
ma'am.
yeah.
Yes, ma'am, you could. So that's how we defined it. And then certain things throughout the process would also create opportunities for you. Let's say, since we designed in a way we could do manual and automated at the same time, what that did for us was we said, okay, we don't want to risk digital during holiday. Let's do that the manual way.
Okay.
And it is pretty complex to do things that way, but we just, de-risked ourselves, if you will.
Yeah. Anything you have to add, John, in terms of timeline?
I think, quite frankly, we spent the right amount of time on the planning. As my mother used to say, ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure, that I think we avoided a lot of the pitfalls. We really did a great job of going through, starting with Happy Path, specifically on the IT side. Not only, we talk about the automation, but there was a whole side to WMS implementation, all the systems that were behind this merchandising. There were a lot of things that came into play to make this happen. And I think the teams worked really well between IT, operations, mechanical, to really map out not only the Happy Path, but gosh, did we spend a lot of time on the exceptions and the what-if scenarios. I mean, some of them, I swear, involved meteors hitting the building.
They were ready for
we
that.
went down every possible plan that could happen, and I think I don't regret spending that time of over-planning up early.
Over-planning.
Yeah.
So over-plan, that's another thing you can write down. Go through as many contingency plans as you can think of, as your team can think of. I'm curious, you mentioned doing, manual at the same time that you were trying to automate. How, I guess, what did it look like on the floor when you've got fulfillment still running while you're ripping apart the building? How did you manage that successfully?
Sure. I mean, it goes back to the team that was on the floor. And so we worked with Jimmy, who's the vice president of operations, and said, can you give us one or two people so that they can really focus on the system side? Because we're not going to take our operators, our DC operators, and have them build the steel, right, the construction. But we did want some people to be a part of the meetings and different things like that. So I want to say it's not as hard as it sounds, but also it's very complex. And if you plan for it well enough, then you can get through it.
Scott says it's not as hard as it sounds, but it's also very complex.
So let's use the term excitement and opportunity in that challenge or problem, and we're in good shape.
Okay.
But I think it was a good example, though, of that buy-in we talked about earlier. We had learned some lessons from Indy and some of the other facilities and brought them forward. But embedding those teammates that are working hand in glove beside you. You're processing manually on one side while I'm building lights-out automation on the left. And because they're embedded, they get excited. They say, okay, you're not changing what I do each day, you're just making my day easier. I'm going to be able to get this done with a little more predictability. I'm going to be able to do this with a little more ease in the function. We got great buy-in from that, and I think that helped ultimately when we went live, that we didn't have that gradual, okay, I'm learning. We had more of a hockey stick type productivity. I think one of the comments you made is when we looked at how we processed versus Indy, that you had like a 20% increase in productivity almost immediately out of the gate versus just because we fixed a few things in the process of how they did it with waving versus no waves, for instance.
I love it. I know my friends at Summit are always talking about people, processes, and technology, and that's what I'm hearing from you all the time. You've got to look at the people. The buy-in seems massive. Having people on board, taking the time to go through it, the processes, being able to look at other successful, taking the knowledge and the expertise from people who have been there and experienced it, that's huge, and getting the right technology. I have a few more questions that I want to make sure we get to. This one from Brian says, change management is critical in bridging the gap between technology and operations in the warehouse. What kind of level of change management did you use? Did you feel like it was effective? Did you have any lessons from that?
And it's at all levels, I think, right? So it's not just, I'll take it from a distribution operations perspective. And so I think we did. Again, it was embedding the people in the roles early so that they could have comprehension. The best day that you'll have is when you go into a break room and they're actually talking about the thing that you're trying to accomplish, right? We can go into a meeting room as leaders and different things, and we can, we're way here on the change curve, but the people, when you walk into the break room or you're out on the patio and you hear those people that are they're talking about that, that's when you know that it's a pretty solid plan and you've done everything you can to make it be successful.
It's really easy for people to just be like, yeah, and then roll their eyes at you. I think one of those keys, and it sounds that you were really successful with this, was that the change was actually good for them, right? Like, I think sometimes it's not actually that much better for them, and that is when they roll their eyes.
I get a kick out of it when I walk. I spend a lot of time on the floor when I'm out there, and I love talking to the operators. And I get a kick out of it when they explain it back to me, let me show you how this works. You kind of smile and you go, yeah, I know, I drew that up myself. But,
it's working just like I drew it.
But it's really, really fun to hear and see when the operators have embraced that change that you've made, because they do see that, hey, this has been a positive on how the business runs. So again, there's a lot of pride in that building if you get out there.
Oh, that's fantastic. Somebody wanted to know what motivated the investment to start, like why, when it happened.
Sure. So, we had a really aggressive store growth plan, and we had a great opportunity with the Shoe Palace team in California moving out of an old building into a new building. So everything really kind of aligned that it was, and you just kind of feel it most of the time. It was just time to do it. And then we knew that in order to make speed to market for us, so we had one DC in Indianapolis. So if we had one on the West Coast, all of a sudden, our retail deliveries are going to be faster for replenishment to the stores. Less frequent size run breaks, if you will. So for us, it was a pretty easy decision. And then, of course, then we talked about the journey already.
Yeah, so the business case for it, it sounds like you already had a plan to grow. I think you had some acquisitions, some other things were going on, right? And you could see also the opportunity for splitting the DCs. Is there anything you had to add, John?
Yeah, I think the only other thing that really was a catalyst for it was just the labor market at the time. I mean, coming out of COVID or in COVID at the time, on top of, I don't know if anybody else has tried to hire people out in Silicon Valley, but it's a little expensive. So going out and trying to find 100 people that want to slug boxes in a DC, they'd rather write code sometimes.
Yeah,
But, so I think the labor that was needed to hit those forecasts also really helped selling that upstairs in terms of getting corporate buy-in to make the investment.
That's fantastic. Buy-in seems super important to me. We talked about kind of the execs, the board getting the money. We talked about operations. What about engineering or merchandising, or did you need to get buy-in from them?
Yes, certainly. Because I happened to work with the engineering group, the buy-in there was pretty easy.
Okay.
So I just basically said, here, let's take a shot at this. But what we did is we had a series of leadership meetings, and we talked about what's your 5-year forecast going to be. And then we were able to show them at some point in time that, their goals for what they wanted to do did not meet our infrastructure, right? Our infrastructure could not meet their goals, rather. So with that, again, it wasn't easy, but there was a lot of time spent with each individual leader to show them at some point we're not going to be in a position to provide the best service that we need to.
Okay, so you made your business case. Somebody asked, how did you address the different needs from various sales channels in terms of automation, like retail versus e-commerce?
Oh, what a great question. They're opposing forces. You've got a push model of the classic retail, a new style SKU set comes in, we're going to push that out through the allocations. You work with the merchants, we get their buy-in on percentages. And then all of a sudden you got point of sale replenishment that starts pulling from the DC, and .com that starts pulling from the DC. And while none of those challenges are unique on their own, it becomes a little more complicated when you're doing it in the same building, but you're also doing it with the same inventory pool. That suddenly I want my residuals to fulfill .com and point of sale. I want to round up my retail orders. You're competing for the same inventory with the same pool. You've got opposing forces on how you want to run your automation and staff your areas. So I think we put a lot of planning into how do I balance the day so that the stores don't miss their deliveries, we don't miss our cut times and promises to the customer. You order a pair of shoes on JD.com, it's going to show up on time, on promise. So how do we balance that through our software, through the staffing plans, through the operation to make that happen? There was a lot of work that went into that, and I think the only caution I learned from it was don't ignore when you talk to the merchants those one little peaks like the Super Saturdays when 10,000 Air Jordans get launched and everybody goes, well, I didn't see that in the averages. You know, make sure you understand those peaks that are going to hit your operation and where they inject nicely into your solution.
Yeah. What were your biggest challenges, I guess, in creating that balance? Was it technology? Was it the actual work on the floor between the push and the pull?
From our team's standpoint on design, when I say ours, I mean your engineering teams, our engineering teams, was really understanding capacities. I talked about that beautiful mind day of we mapped out every flow with the peaks, the averages. We modeled it across a year's worth of inventory, a year's worth of orders where we could, and trying to model what happens when that peak day hits at the same time we're bleeding over from back to school. Do we have the mechanical capacity to absorb those two flows? Do we have a staffing plan that allows us to operate those at the same time, or are they separate flows that happen at separate times and we can balance? So we put a lot of time between the two engineering groups to size the appropriate technology to handle what happens on a day-to-day. You've got to put that element of time into your plan, not just the mechanical three-dimensional layout, if you might. It's a living, breathing thing each day in the DC.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about, we've got 10, 12 minutes left, so make sure you send in questions if you've got them. But I want to talk about kind of results, what you've seen. First, I guess, anything else you want to say in terms of lessons learned during the process on communication, on people, and any tips that you have for them on that before we move on?
For me, it is that as soon as you get your requirements, so what does your success criteria look like? What are the requirements, get the buy-in from the other leaders? Merchants would say this percent is doing digital, this percent's doing retail. You should refine that all the time throughout the process. Make sure that's in play.
Continually refine.
Also, once you get with the vendor, make sure that you review the electricity requirements, because that's huge and that can cause some delays for you. And you have to think this building had nothing in it for us. So when we put all the steel and we built it vertical, then all of a sudden we had to have a sprinkler system in there. So when you take a look at what we call our ancillary list, you have to really go from the slab all the way to the ceiling. And it's also, where they say measure twice and cut once. Yeah. So you should probably always measure your building heights and your different things that can get in the way.
Just in case you've got one joist that's off by 10 inches?
Just not that happens. No. So yes.
That would never happen.
Just in case that happens. So yeah, you'll measure twice, cut once. And I know we all understand that, but you really should start at the concrete and you should work your way up, and you should think, you can come into a building like this, your existing DC, and you can look around and just start taking some quick notes on, what have you done over the years, right? What have you done here to make it better? So.
I would add, not necessarily a lesson learned, but a lesson reinforced. And that was communication, is one of the things you brought up. Anybody that's going to tell you these projects go flawlessly and on plan is lying to you. No
I think that was Scott at the beginning.
Yes, no battle plan survives the first volley. And I think where we collectively as a delivery team did really well, and at all levels, was communication, over-communicating. We still have a weekly executive call every Friday that, bad news doesn't age well. Was kind of our motto from day one, and that we've got that relationship between the partners in the project of problems are going to come up. It does nobody any good to hide them. Get them out front. Let's deal with them and knock them down so that we can stay on our happy path of success. So I think that communication at all levels, from the people on the floor to the project teams, the installers, all the way up to the exec levels of top-to-top communication was paramount to the success of this
Love
endeavor.
that. Bad news doesn't age well. I think we can all take that as life lesson as well. But communication being huge. I'm really struck by how much preparation and time. I'm a little guilty of being the kind of person who's like, okay, let's just get started. And so I'm really impressed. Take your time with the planning, be thorough, look through everything, communicate well, all really, really impressive things. So where are we at now? One of our questions actually I want to ask is, what are your plans for your next step? Impressive. You can tell these gentlemen would have a next step. You know, where do you want to go from here? But I also want to know here, like, what improvements have you seen? How is it running now? What is the current state? How are we doing with everything? ROI, buy-in?
Yeah. So it's to realize everything. You have to realize everything now, right? We said that we were going to do these things, and now we have to do them consistently. So we need to make sure that our cost per unit stays in line. We need to make sure that our quality is maintained. So right now in this project, we're at the point where we're going to go back and refine everything. You write an SOP out how you think things are going to work, and then you got to go to the floor and you have to work through the team members on the floor and say, give us a feedback that's probably more quality than me just up here on the stage trying to make an SOP. So we'll do that refinement. We'll do the engagement piece, which is really the follow-up on what we spoke about already, which was communicate early and often for us. And then after that, we want to really exceed what our expectations were. So how can we be creative now that we have this automation at our fingertips? If you just settle all the time, you'll just be settled. And so we don't want to do that. We want to consistently be creative on what we have available to ourselves now.
So refine after. So plan before, continue to refine after. And during, keep everybody happy and excited. Did you have anything?
No, I think Scott had said well. My personal goals are just continuing to monitor the progress, coaching. What did we learn that we can apply at the other buildings, other operations? But we know the business is going to change again. It's inevitable. There's always going to be change. So I think for all of us, it's a critical mandate to continue to watch for it, be out in front of it, and when we see that change coming from whether it's merchants, acquisition, change in volumes or profiles, knowing that we're self-aware of what our operation looks like, of okay, let's get a plan in place before that wave hits us.
Okay, awesome. All right, I've got a few questions. We're going to go through them. Was there anything that surprised you in the results, positive or negative?
I think we did such good planning, as you mentioned several times, and I don't know if anything surprised us. No. So really the involvement of the operations team, I wasn't surprised, but just how quickly they adopted. I mean, they didn't use computer screens in a room or anything. It was just pallet jacks and like little scanners and one little computer. So the way that they've adopted things, if I had to pick something, and it's a real positive, is just that they adopted it and then they become experts at it. I think that was an accelerated timeline for me.
The power of the people. Yeah. Did you have anything that surprised you, John?
No, I think, I hate to repeat Scott's answer, but it is really impressive to see a team that went from a very manual, as manual as it gets, in some cases working off pieces of paper out on the floor, to how they can sit there and describe to you a one-touch process. If I touch that box once on the receiving dock, and then it hits the other dock at some point and goes through ASRS and all that, they have adopted high-end technology in one little leap.
Yeah,
and
that's amazing.
They've embraced it, but not only did they figure it out, but they're really happy about it.
Yeah.
It's been encouraging.
Somebody wants to know what investment, or is there a specific thing in the warehouse that you feel like had the highest ROI? I think I remembered chatting about cranes or something. Cranes being really good.
Yeah, the cranes definitely eliminated, the
Shuttles.
forklift work, the racking work. We actually have a put-to-store module too, so, the environment they had to travel a lot, and so now the goods come right to them and they do a packing process. So I think really, for me, it's all the above, because we took it from nothing, and, they didn't even have to inline print and apply, as an example.
It's
right?
like a whole new world.
They were just labeling everything on the side, so It's all the above.
But part of that process that we went through is every little area had to have an ROI. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you leave it manual. You leave it basic. So I don't know if you could point to one thing and say, hey, that's the best thing in the building. They all contributed. There are some that had better ROIs than other areas, but I don't think that process allowed us not to over-automate an area. Everything was the appropriate level of investment based on the
not over-automate an area, the appropriate level. Okay, somebody wants to know, how did you integrate the new automation into the existing SW landscape? I couldn't think what SW meant.
software.
Oh, software landscape.
It was pretty complex, but we were thoughtful about engaging our vendor partners early. So we had, Aptos was our WMS there, and so how can we integrate that? But then also operate it manually, and then have Aptos still feed the new system. And so all very technical, all very technical things. But it was really just
Engaging the right people.
mapping it out, engaging the right people early to make sure that we had named resources, so that people that had worked on our projects before knew what we were going through, and we didn't have to start over with somebody new all the time.
It seems like you used a lot of different resources. Can you share there's so many, but you talked about vendors. What did you do in terms of who would you reach out to get?
You couldn't feed the meeting with 3 pizzas.
Yeah.
I can tell you that.
Okay.
There were some big meetings, but I think the only thing I'd add to what Scott said was I don't think at any one given point in the whole software integration layer did we ever put ourselves in a position where we couldn't back out and go to where we were yesterday. If it didn't go according to plan that weekend, there was always a backport.
You had a contingency for a contingency for a contingency, I think.
Yes.
Rollback plans are critical, and because it gets everybody thinking that way all the time.
Yeah.
It's not just when we put this in, we're all in, and if something bad happens, we have to just muscle through it. And so when we got all the teams to think that way, then everybody that came into the room knew that was just expected. And fortunately for us, we didn't have to back out a lot of things because they're well thought out.
Okay, we're going to do a couple more. We have a lot of questions. Curious about the slab issue. Was the issue with site prep, with loading applied? What did you learn about slabs from that?
It was a spec building build that just wasn't poured for high automation. We had upward force with the cranes. So we had to do some slab remediation, which is a fancy word for you cut the concrete out, you put in some rebar, and pour some new concrete. Which ironically was not as painful as I thought it would be in the area. The teams did a very good job, man. It's not the first time I've had to do concrete work, but it wasn't a miss on the project team. It was an existing building that never contemplated.
How did you identify that it was an issue?
When we submitted engineering plans and did core samples, it became a little curveball for us.
Okay, good. Was there any consideration to the future state of merchandise returns? What about reusable transport and other packaging as a result of current and future EPR regulations, California regulations?
So merchandise returns, we did design that into our process. It's something that typically automation wouldn't probably handle very well. Everybody's got a manual return. You have to look at the shoe. There's all kinds of details you have to get. But we did design a way and to take inventory that should be available for sale again and to introduce it into the automation, into the shuttle system. So it's available for each channel after that.
Final tips. I'm sure that both of these gentlemen can answer so many questions if you have them specifically. They really are so good. I love one thing. I just had to shout out Scott here. At the beginning, he said, I hate when I have to introduce myself. I don't want to be a VP. I'm just a team member. That kind of mindset is why his teams get buy-in and why they're excited, because he cares about the people. And it's not just about being the VP. So any final words, any last things? Our time is up.
Go ahead, John.
I think we've probably outlined a lot of it here of just take the time to really map out your business, understand where you want to be in 5 years, know that plan could change, so leave yourself some white space in the building, leave some contingency plans, but get the buy-in of your entire team. Don't be afraid to talk to everybody from the person that changes the garbage can locations each day, all the way up to your CIO. They've all got some input that you will find meaningful. I promise you it will have an impact on your design and ultimately the health of your building and your culture.
Thanks.
just be honest, communicate a lot. That's really it.
Thank you so much. This has been such a fun session.